The newsfeed crackled to life across every human settlement in the galaxy. What started as routine propaganda from the LaterTheir Empire quickly turned into something that would ignite the fury of an entire species. 12-year-old Marcus Chen had been playing in the ruins of New Shanghai when the Empire's patrol found him. The boy had been scavenging for spare parts to help his family's broken water purifier. His only crime was existing in a sector the Empire had declared off-limits to human civilians. Commander Vextal of the LaterTheir 3rd Legion stood before the broadcast camera, his scaled face twisted in what his species considered a smile. Behind him, young Marcus knelt in the dirt, his hands bound behind his back. The boy's face was streaked with tears, but his eyes burned with defiance that would have made his ancestors proud. "Citizens of the Empire," Vextal began, his voice carrying the typical arrogance of his kind. "Today we demonstrate what happens to those who defy our authority. This human child violated Sector 7 restrictions. The penalty for such disobedience is death." Across human space, mothers pulled their children closer. Fathers clenched their fists until their knuckles turned white. In the depths of space stations, in the colonies on distant worlds, in the hidden bases where the human resistance planned their next moves, millions of people watched in horror. Marcus lifted his head, looking directly into the camera. His voice was small but clear, carrying across the galaxy with words that would echo through history. "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 12 years old. I was just trying to help my family. Tell my mom and dad I love them." Vextal raised his plasma rifle. The weapon hummed with deadly energy, its barrel pointed at the back of the boy's head. "Let this be a lesson to all humans. You exist only at the Empire's mercy." The shot rang out across the galaxy. Marcus Chen fell forward into the dirt, his small body motionless. The broadcast continued for several more seconds, showing the Empire soldiers standing over the child's body, before cutting to the usual propaganda about the Empire's benevolence and strength. But something had changed in that moment. In military command centers buried deep beneath Earth's surface, alarms began to sound. On mining colonies in the Outer Rim, human workers stopped their machines and looked up at the sky with new purpose. In the hidden research facilities where humanity's brightest minds worked on projects the Empire knew nothing about, scientists and engineers exchanged meaningful glances. Captain Sarah Rodriguez sat in the command center of the UES Retribution, humanity's most advanced warship hidden in the shadow of a gas giant. She watched the broadcast replay 3 times before speaking. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook with barely controlled rage. "Send the signal," she ordered. "All units, all cells, all sleeper agents. Operation Prometheus is now active." Her communications officer, Lieutenant Hayes, looked up from his console. "Ma'am, are you sure? Once we send this, there's no going back. The Empire will know we've been preparing." Rodriguez stood and walked to the main view screen where the stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there, a 12-year-old boy had just died for the crime of trying to help his family. Somewhere out there, the Empire's soldiers were celebrating another demonstration of their power. "They want to show the galaxy what happens when you cross the Empire," she said quietly. "It's time we showed them what happens when you cross humanity." The signal went out 8 minutes after Marcus Chen died. Across human space, sleeper cells activated. Hidden weapons caches were opened. Ships that the Empire believed were simple cargo haulers revealed their true nature as military vessels. Research stations that had been dismissed as mining operations suddenly came online with technology the Empire had never seen. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship Dominion, Admiral Krextar received the first reports with amusement. Humans were predictable creatures, prone to emotional outbursts and futile gestures of defiance. They had tried to rebel before and failed miserably. "How many ships are we detecting?" he asked his tactical officer. "Initial scans show approximately 50 vessels, Admiral. Nothing larger than a frigate class. Our fleet alone outnumbers them 3 to 1. Krextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. 50 ships? They send 50 ships against the might of the Empire? Prepare the fleet for battle. We'll crush this rebellion before it truly begins." But the tactical officer's expression had changed as more data came in. His scaled hands moved frantically across his console. "Admiral, I'm reading additional signatures. The numbers are... They're climbing rapidly." "How rapidly?" Krextar's amusement began to fade. 100 ships now, sir." "No, wait. 200. "Admiral, they're coming from everywhere. Every system with a human population is showing military vessels we didn't know existed. On screens across the Empire's command centers, the tactical displays lit up like deadly fireworks. What had appeared to be a minor insurrection was revealing itself as something far more organized and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The humans had been waiting. They had been preparing, and they had been underestimated for the last time. In the 8 minutes since Marcus Chen's death, the galaxy had become a very different place. The Empire was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their ability to remember every injustice, every cruelty, every child who had died for the Empire's amusement. And they were very, very good at holding grudges. The first phase of Operation Prometheus unfolded with surgical precision. Across 17 star systems, human vessels that had masqueraded as civilian craft for decades suddenly revealed their true nature. Cargo haulers split open to reveal missile batteries. Mining ships extended hidden weapon arrays. Research stations activated defense grids that shouldn't have existed. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the command center of Research Station Omega-7, watching as her life's work finally came to fruition. For 20 years, she had pretended to study asteroid compositions, while secretly developing humanity's most advanced weapons technology. The Empire's arrogance had been their gift to her. They never bothered to truly inspect human facilities, considering them too primitive to pose any threat. "Prometheus cannon is charging," announced her assistant, Dr. Kim. "We'll have full power in 6 minutes." Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the massive weapon that now extended from their station like a spear, pointed at the heart of the Empire. The Prometheus cannon used principles of physics the Empire had dismissed as impossible. They were about to learn otherwise. Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez guided the Retribution out of the gas giant's shadow. Her ship was a masterpiece of human engineering, built in secret over 15 years using resources diverted from dozens of mining operations. The Empire saw numbers on spreadsheets that showed metal and components going to infrastructure projects. They never realized those projects were building a war machine. "All stations report ready, Captain," Lieutenant Hayes announced. "The fleet is in position." Rodriguez looked at the tactical display. The Empire's response had been swift and overwhelming. Admiral Krextar had deployed nearly 1,000 ships to crush what he still believed was a minor human uprising. The Imperial fleet formed a massive battle line, their ships bristling with weapons that had conquered a dozen species. But humanity had learned from watching those conquests. They had studied every battle, analyzed every tactic, and prepared for this moment with the patience of a species that understood the value of playing the long game. "Open a channel to all human forces," Rodriguez commanded. "This is for Marcus." The battle began not with the Empire's overwhelming assault, but with something they had never encountered before. Human ships didn't charge forward in formation like honorable warriors. Instead, they scattered like leaves in a hurricane, forcing the Empire fleet to spread their firepower across dozens of targets. Admiral Krextar watched in confusion as human vessels seemed to dance around his ships. "What are they doing? This isn't a proper battle formation." His tactical officers studied the readings with growing concern. "Admiral, they're not trying to engage us directly. They're forcing us to extend our lines, making us vulnerable to..." The Prometheus cannon fired its first shot at that moment. A beam of pure energy, invisible to the naked eye but devastating beyond imagination, punched through the shields of the Imperial dreadnought Conqueror like they were made of paper. The massive ship simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant that left only glowing particles where 6,000 Imperial soldiers had been. "Impossible," Krextar breathed. "Their technology can't be that advanced." But the impossible was just beginning. Across the battlefield, human ships revealed weapons and tactics the Empire had never seen. Fighters that moved with impossible agility, protected by energy shields that bent space itself around them. Missiles that didn't just explode but created localized gravity wells that crushed Imperial ships from within. Commander Torres piloted her fighter through the Imperial formation with movements that defied physics. Her ship's experimental drive allowed her to briefly step outside normal space, appearing and disappearing like a ghost among the enemy fleet. Each time she materialized, another Imperial fighter died. "This is Blue Leader," she reported over the comm. "Their formation is breaking apart. They can't track us when we phase." The Empire's soldiers had conquered the galaxy through superior firepower and brutal efficiency. They had never faced an enemy that refused to stand still and trade shots. Human tactics were chaos made manifest, unpredictable and devastating. But it was more than just technology and tactics. Every human in the fleet carried the memory of Marcus Chen's final moments. They fought with the fury of a species that had been pushed too far, that had endured too much, that had finally decided to push back. Dr. Vasquez watched as her second shot from the Prometheus cannon destroyed an entire Imperial cruiser squadron. The weapon drew power from the station's fusion reactors, but more than that, it drew purpose from the knowledge that somewhere, Marcus Chen's parents were watching the news feeds and seeing their son's killers pay the price. "Target the command ship," she ordered. "Let's see how brave Admiral Krextar is when he's the one being hunted." The Imperial Admiral found himself in an impossible situation. His massive fleet was being systematically dismantled by forces that appeared and disappeared like nightmares. Every tactical manual, every strategic doctrine the Empire had developed was useless against an enemy that refused to fight by the rules. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 12 of our ships. They're reporting critical damage and requesting permission to retreat." Krextar's mandibles clicked in rage. "Denied. The Empire does not retreat from primitives." But even as he spoke, another Imperial ship exploded on his view screen. The humans weren't just winning. They were making it look easy. Worse, they were doing it with technology that should have taken centuries to develop. What the Empire didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for this moment since the first human colony was established. Every mining operation had secretly contributed materials to the war effort. Every research station had worked on pieces of the puzzle. Every human citizen had been part of a conspiracy spanning generations, all building toward this single moment of retribution. Captain Rodriguez watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The Empire had ruled through fear for too long. Today they would learn what fear truly meant. "Lieutenant Hayes," she ordered, "signal the second wave. It's time to show them what we've really been building." In the depths of space, camouflaged among asteroid fields and hidden in the shadows of planets, the rest of humanity's secret fleet began to move. Ships that dwarfed anything the Empire had seen, weapons that made the Prometheus cannon look like a toy, and most importantly, soldiers who carried in their hearts the memory of every human who had died under Imperial rule. The Empire had executed one boy to send a message. Humanity was about to reply with a message of their own. The second wave of humanity's fleet emerged from hidden positions across the star system, like predators revealing themselves to cornered prey. Admiral Krextar watched his tactical display fill with red warning signals as ships materialized from what his sensors had read as empty space just moments before. "How many?" he demanded, his voice cracking with the first notes of panic. His tactical officer's hands trembled as he read the displays. 2,000 ships, Admiral." "No, that number is still climbing. 3,000. They're everywhere." What the Empire was witnessing was the culmination of 50 years of human planning. The species that they had dismissed as primitive had been building the largest secret military force in galactic history. Every asteroid mining operation had been a cover for shipyard construction. Every research station had been manufacturing weapons and training soldiers. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as humanity's true strength revealed itself. Behind her, the massive form of the UES Prometheus emerged from the shadow of the system's largest moon. The ship was 5 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that incorporated technology reverse-engineered from a dozen different alien species. "All units, this is Admiral Chen," came a voice over the communication system. Rodriguez smiled grimly at the name. Marcus Chen's grandfather had been chosen to lead this operation, ensuring that the boy's sacrifice would be remembered by the man who commanded humanity's revenge. Admiral Chen continued his broadcast. "Today we show the galaxy that humanity will no longer kneel. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier in this fleet represents a promise made to every human child who has suffered under Imperial rule. Today we keep that promise. The battle that followed redefined warfare in the galaxy. Human ships moved with coordination that seemed impossible, each vessel perfectly positioned to support the others. They fought like a single organism with 3,000 deadly limbs, striking where the Empire was weak and vanishing when the enemy tried to retaliate. Commander Vextal, the officer who had executed Marcus Chen, found himself aboard the Imperial cruiser Retribution as human forces surrounded his ship. He watched in horror as the primitive weapons he had mocked tore through his shields like they were made of paper. "This can't be happening," he muttered, watching another Imperial ship explode on his view screen. "They're supposed to be inferior." His first officer, a veteran of a dozen Imperial conquests, stared at the tactical display in disbelief. "Sir, they're not fighting like any species we've encountered. They're using tactics from every military tradition in the galaxy, combined in ways that should be impossible." What the Empire didn't understand was that humanity had studied every conquest, every battle, every tactical manual of every species they had defeated. Humans had a unique gift for learning from others, adapting and improving on what they observed. They had taken the best strategies from 100 different cultures and forged them into something entirely new. Dr. Vasquez fired the Prometheus cannon again, this time targeting the Imperial flagship directly. The massive beam of energy struck the Dominion's shields and kept burning, overloading systems that had never failed before. Admiral Krextar watched his ship's defenses collapse layer by layer. "All power to shields," he screamed. "Reroute everything." But it was too late. The Prometheus cannon punched through the flagship's defenses and carved a massive hole through its hull. The pride of the Imperial fleet began to list as atmosphere rushed out into space, carrying with it the debris of 1,000 years of Imperial arrogance. Meanwhile, fighter squadrons led by Commander Torres harassed the Imperial fleet like angry hornets. Her experimental phase drive technology allowed human fighters to appear inside enemy formations, strike with devastating effect, and vanish before the Empire could respond. "This is Blue Squadron," she reported. "We've crippled their carrier group. They can't launch fighters anymore." The tide of battle turned decisively when humanity revealed their most carefully guarded secret. Ships that the Empire had dismissed as destroyers suddenly opened like flowers, revealing themselves to be massive carriers. Thousands of fighters poured out, each one piloted by humans who had trained their entire lives for this moment. But these weren't ordinary fighters. Each one was equipped with AI systems that learned and adapted in real time, becoming more effective with every engagement. The Empire's pilots, trained in rigid tactical doctrines, found themselves outmatched by enemies that seemed to predict their every move. "Sir," Admiral Krextar's communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender signals from 47 ships. Our casualties are approaching 30%. Krextar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His overwhelming force was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that shouldn't have been able to match a single Imperial cruiser. The humans weren't just winning. They were making it look effortless. The final blow came when Admiral Chen ordered the deployment of humanity's ultimate weapon. Deep in the heart of the Prometheus, a device that had taken 20 years to build began to charge. It used principles of quantum mechanics that the Empire's scientists had declared theoretically impossible. "Quantum disruptor at full power," reported the weapons officer. "Target locked on the remaining Imperial formation." Admiral Chen nodded gravely. "Fire." The weapon didn't create an explosion or beam of energy. Instead, it reached across space and simply convinced the quantum bonds holding the Imperial ships together that they no longer wanted to exist. 50 Imperial vessels simultaneously came apart at the molecular level, their atoms scattering into space like dust in the wind. The surviving Imperial ships broke formation and fled. Admiral Krextar's flagship, crippled and burning, tried to retreat with the others, but human ships surrounded them, not to destroy them but to capture them. "This is Admiral Chen to the Imperial survivors," came the broadcast. "You are hereby under arrest for crimes against humanity. Surrender immediately or face the same fate as your companions." One by one, the remaining Imperial ships powered down their weapons and submitted to human boarding parties. Commander Vextel, the officer who had executed Marcus Chen, found himself in chains aboard a human vessel, facing a tribunal that would hold him accountable for his crimes. The battle was over in less than 6 hours. The Empire's Third Fleet, pride of their military, had been completely destroyed or captured by forces they had dismissed as primitives. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carrying with it a message that would change everything. Humanity was no longer hiding. They were no longer weak, and they were very, very angry. On Earth, in a small apartment in New Shanghai, Marcus Chen's parents watched the news broadcasts with tears streaming down their faces. Their son's death had not been in vain. The boy who had died trying to help his family had instead helped save his entire species. The war for the galaxy had begun, and the Empire had just learned that they were no longer the hunters. They had become the prey. News of the Empire's catastrophic defeat spread across the galaxy faster than their military commanders could control the narrative. On 1,000 worlds, species that had lived under Imperial rule for generations watched in stunned silence as footage of burning Imperial ships filled their screens. Emperor Zakthul himself stood before the Galactic Council, his ornate robes unable to hide the trembling in his scaled hands. For 500 years, his family had ruled through absolute power and fear. Now, for the first time, that power had been challenged and found wanting. Honored council members, he began, his voice carrying none of its usual arrogant authority. What occurred in the Terran system was an unexpected setback. A few human rebels with stolen technology managed to achieve a temporary victory through cowardice and deception. But the council chambers buzzed with whispered conversations in a dozen different languages. The Valdorian representative, whose people had been enslaved by the Empire for 2 centuries, leaned forward with new interest in her eyes. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "the reports suggest this was far more than stolen technology. Our intelligence networks indicate the humans have been building this fleet for decades. How did your surveillance fail so completely?" Emperor Zakthul's response was interrupted by urgent reports flooding in from across Imperial space. The human victory had triggered something the Empire had never expected: hope. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, the Thraxian workers who had been forced to extract minerals for Imperial shipyards suddenly stopped their machinery. For the first time in 50 years, they looked up at their overseers with something other than fear. "Did you see the broadcasts?" whispered Kethvar, an elderly Thraxian whose people had been conquered when he was young. "The humans destroyed an entire Imperial fleet. They actually won." His friend Morden nodded, his 4 eyes wide with amazement. "My grandfather used to tell stories about when our world was free. I thought they were just fairy tales." Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening in factories, mines, and slave colonies. The Empire's greatest weapon had always been the belief that resistance was futile. Humanity had just proven that belief wrong. Meanwhile, Admiral Chen stood in the command center of the captured Imperial flagship Dominion, studying the intelligence data his teams had extracted from the ship's computers. What they found exceeded even their most optimistic projections. "The Empire is weaker than we thought," reported Intelligence Officer Park, a woman who had spent years infiltrating Imperial facilities. "Their military is stretched across 3,000 systems. They rely on fear and the threat of overwhelming force, but their actual defensive capabilities are concentrated in maybe 50 core worlds." Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. "They've been ruling through bluff for centuries. Now that someone has called that bluff, the whole structure becomes vulnerable." But humanity's leaders were not naive. They knew the Empire would respond to this defeat with overwhelming force. Every human settlement in the galaxy was now a target, and the enemy would be coming with everything they had. Dr. Vasquez worked frantically to prepare the Prometheus cannon for transport to other systems. Her weapon had proven devastatingly effective, but one cannon could not defend all of human space. She needed to build more, and quickly. "The power requirements are enormous," she explained to Admiral Chen over a secure communication link. "Each cannon needs a dedicated fusion plant and a week to charge between shots. But the psychological impact might be even more valuable than the tactical advantage." On Earth itself, President Martinez addressed the human population in a broadcast that would be remembered for generations. She stood in the ruins of the old United Nations building, a deliberate reminder of humanity's long journey toward unity. "My fellow humans," she began, "today we proved something that tyrants throughout history have tried to deny. We proved that no people, no matter how powerful their oppressors, must accept slavery forever. Marcus Chen died as a symbol of imperial cruelty, but he lives on as a symbol of human defiance." The response from human colonies across the galaxy was immediate and overwhelming. Volunteers enlisted in numbers that exceeded every projection. Resources poured in from settlements that had claimed poverty for decades, revealing hidden stockpiles that had been accumulated over generations. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. The Antarian Collective, a species of insectoid traders who had maintained strict neutrality for centuries, sent a secret delegation to meet with human leadership. Ambassador Zekesh, speaking through a translation device that converted her species' pheromone communications into audible words, addressed Admiral Chen aboard the Prometheus. Your victory has created opportunities that extend beyond your conflict with the Empire. There are others who have waited for such a moment. Chen leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of others? Species who remember freedom. Worlds that still harbor resistance movements. The Empire has many enemies, Admiral Chen. But until now we lacked the hope necessary to act. You have given us that hope. What emerged from these secret negotiations was the foundation of the largest alliance in galactic history, the Thraxians with their expertise in mining and engineering, the Valdorians, master strategists who had maintained hidden military academies for 2 centuries, the Corvan Federation, whose ships could traverse hyperspace routes the Empire didn't even know existed. Each species brought their own reasons for hatred of imperial rule. The Corvan had watched their homeworld strip-mined for rare metals. The Valdorians had seen their greatest cities bombed into rubble for the crime of producing art the Empire found inappropriate. The Thraxians had been bred for manual labor, their natural intelligence suppressed through genetic manipulation. But they also brought something else, unique technologies and tactical knowledge that would complement humanity's growing arsenal. The Corvan shared their advanced hyperspace navigation systems. The Valdorians provided strategic intelligence on Imperial weak points. The Thraxians offered their expertise in creating weapons from industrial equipment. Within days of humanity's first victory, what had begun as a human rebellion was transforming into something far more dangerous to Imperial rule, a galactic revolution. Emperor Zakthul received these reports with growing alarm. His advisors painted increasingly dire pictures of unrest spreading across Imperial space. Production quotas were failing as workers abandoned their posts. Garrison commanders reported discipline problems as their troops questioned orders for the first time in their careers. How many ships can we deploy to crush this rebellion? The Emperor demanded. Grand Admiral Vorthak, Supreme Commander of Imperial forces, studied the tactical displays with professional concern. We can assemble perhaps 2,000 ships within a month, Your Majesty. But that would require pulling forces from border defense and internal security operations. Do it, Zakthul ordered. Crush the humans and their allies before this spreads further. But even as the Empire marshaled its forces for a massive retaliation, human agents were already infiltrating Imperial facilities across the galaxy. The same people who had spent decades pretending to be simple merchants and technicians were now revealing themselves as saboteurs and intelligence operatives. The galaxy stood on the brink of a war that would determine the fate of every sentient species. On one side, an empire that had ruled through fear and oppression for centuries. On the other, an alliance of the oppressed led by a species that had just demonstrated something remarkable about themselves. Humans, it turned out, were very good at making friends. And they were even better at keeping promises to those friends. The Empire was about to learn that their greatest mistake wasn't underestimating human military capability. It was underestimating the human capacity to inspire others to dream of freedom. Emperor Zakthul stood before the largest war room in Imperial history, watching as his military commanders assembled the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. 2,000 ships of the line, supported by 5,000 smaller vessels, all converging on human space with one purpose: the complete extermination of the species that dared challenge Imperial rule. This time we will not underestimate them, Grand Admiral Vorthak declared, his scarred face reflecting the light from tactical displays. Every human world will be reduced to ash. Every human ship will be atomized. We will make their extinction so complete that other species will forget they ever existed. But the Emperor was no longer the confident ruler he had been before humanity's first victory. Intelligence reports painted a disturbing picture of rebellion spreading across Imperial space like a plague. Production facilities were being sabotaged. Garrison troops were deserting in unprecedented numbers. Entire sectors were declaring independence and requesting human protection. What of our allies? Zakthul asked. Surely other species understand the danger of allowing this rebellion to succeed. His intelligence chief, a cybernetically enhanced Kularian named Nexivs, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Your Majesty, our traditional allies are remaining neutral. The hegemony of worlds has recalled their fleets to defensive positions. The corporate systems have suspended trade agreements pending resolution of current conflicts. Even the militarist union is questioning whether intervention serves their interests. The truth was more devastating than Nexivs dared speak aloud. Humanity's victory had revealed something that terrified the Empire's supposed allies. If humans could defeat Imperial forces so decisively, what did that say about the Empire's ability to protect those who serve them? Worse, human diplomats were reaching out to neutral species with offers of trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Captain Rodriguez had been tasked with these negotiations, and her success exceeded all expectations. "The humans offer us what the Empire never has," explained Ambassador Talana of the Centauri Federation to her council. "They offer partnership, not domination. They share technology instead of hoarding it. When they say they come in peace, they actually mean it." Rodriguez sat across from Talana in a conference room aboard the diplomatic vessel UES Harmony, a ship specifically designed to demonstrate human intentions. Unlike Imperial vessels bristling with weapons, the Harmony was clearly built for exploration and peaceful contact. "We're not asking you to join our war," Rodriguez explained carefully. "We're asking you to consider what kind of galaxy you want your children to inherit. One ruled by fear and oppression, or one where species work together as equals." The Federation's response was swift and decisive. Within hours, they had signed a non-aggression pact with humanity and opened their trade routes to human shipping. Other neutral species quickly followed suit, creating a network of safe passage that allowed human forces to move freely through regions the Empire considered secure. Meanwhile, Admiral Chen coordinated the largest military buildup in human history. The secret shipyards that had constructed the First Fleet worked around the clock to produce new vessels. But this time, they weren't working alone. The Thraxian mining fleets had joined the effort. Their massive industrial ships converted into mobile factories that could produce weapons and ammunition anywhere in space. The Valdorian Strategic Corps provided tactical analysis that allowed human forces to predict Imperial movements with uncanny accuracy. The Corvan stealth technology made entire fleets invisible to Imperial sensors. Dr. Vasquez had succeeded in building 3 more Prometheus cannons, each one more powerful than the last. But her greatest achievement was the development of a new type of weapon that used quantum entanglement to strike targets across vast distances instantaneously. "We can hit Imperial facilities and their core systems without ever leaving human space," she explained to Admiral Chen. "Their fleets won't even know they're under attack until their support infrastructure starts exploding." But humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technological, it was ideological. Every human soldier, from the newest recruit to the most experienced admiral, carried the memory of Marcus Chen's sacrifice. They fought not just for victory, but for justice. They fought not just for humanity, but for every species that had suffered under Imperial rule. This moral clarity gave them an advantage the Empire couldn't understand or counter. Imperial troops fought because they were ordered to fight. Human troops fought because they believed in what they were fighting for. The difference became apparent when the first major engagement of the new war began. Imperial Admiral Krextal, who had survived the destruction of his previous fleet and been given command of the Empire's revenge force, expected to face desperate human defenders trying to protect their colonies. Instead, he found himself facing an enemy that had learned from their previous victory and grown stronger. Human ships moved with even greater coordination, their tactics refined through constant simulation and practice. Allied forces provided capabilities the Empire had never encountered. "Their formation is impossible," reported Krextal's tactical officer. "Those Corvan ships are phasing in and out of normal space. Our weapons can't lock onto them." Krextal watched in horror as his overwhelming numerical advantage meant nothing against enemies who could appear anywhere on the battlefield without warning. Human commanders used their allied forces like instruments in an orchestra, each species contributing their unique strengths to create something greater than the sum of their parts. The quantum cannons fired their first shots in combat, reaching across space to destroy Imperial shipyards deep in enemy territory. The psychological impact was devastating. Imperial forces realized that no target, no matter how well defended or how far from the front lines, was safe from human retaliation. But the humans had learned something else from their study of galactic history: the importance of mercy. When Imperial ships surrendered, they were treated with dignity. Captured officers were given the opportunity to join the Alliance or return home with messages for their families. Commander Vextal, the officer who had executed Marcus Chen, found himself in a very different position when his ship was captured for the second time. Instead of facing execution, he was brought before a human tribunal that offered him something unprecedented: the chance to testify against his superiors in exchange for amnesty. "You pulled the trigger," Admiral Chen told him during the interrogation, "but you were following orders from people who created a system that made that murder inevitable. Help us hold them accountable, and help us build something better." Bextel's decision to cooperate provided humanity with intelligence that would prove crucial in the battles ahead. He revealed the locations of Imperial black sites where political prisoners were held. He provided access codes to classified military networks. Most importantly, he gave humanity insight into the Empire's ultimate contingency plan. "If they believe they're truly losing," Bextel explained, "they'll activate the Omega Protocol. They have weapons hidden throughout the galaxy that can sterilize entire star systems. If the Empire falls, they intend to take every rebellious world with them." This revelation changed everything. The war was no longer about defeating the Empire. It was about defeating them quickly enough to prevent galactic genocide. Humanity and their allies now faced an enemy that would literally destroy the galaxy, rather than lose control of it. Admiral Chen stood in the command center of the Prometheus, watching as reports flooded in from across the battlefield. The Empire's revenge fleet was in full retreat, but victory felt hollow in light of what they had learned. "Signal all Allied forces," he ordered. "We're moving to Phase 2. It's time to take the fight directly to the Imperial capital." The war had entered a new stage. No longer content to defend themselves, humanity and their allies were about to attempt something that hadn't been tried in 500 years. An assault on the heart of Imperial power itself. The Emperor was about to learn that mercy was not a weakness. It was a weapon that could turn even his most loyal servants against him. The Imperial capital world of LaterTheir Prime had never been threatened in its 1,000-year history. Protected by defensive installations that could destroy entire fleets, surrounded by layer upon layer of military checkpoints, the planet was considered the most secure location in the galaxy. That changed when humanity and their allies translated into the system with a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Marcus Chen, a massive dreadnought built specifically for this assault and named in honor of the boy whose death had started this war. Around him, 3,000 Allied ships moved in perfect formation, representing dozens of species united by a common desire for freedom. "Initial scans complete, Admiral," reported his tactical officer. "Defensive grid shows approximately 500 orbital platforms, plus the Imperial Guard fleet in high anchor. Total enemy forces estimated at 800 ships," Chen nodded grimly. The numbers were still heavily in favor of the defenders, but this battle wouldn't be won through simple mathematics. Humanity had brought something the Empire couldn't quantify: the fury of an entire galaxy's oppressed peoples. Emperor Zakthul watched the approaching fleet from his palace observatory, his hands trembling with rage and fear. How did they penetrate our outer defenses? The perimeter stations should have detected them days ago. "The perimeter stations are gone, Your Majesty," reported Admiral Vorthak. "Our intelligence suggests the humans have been systematically eliminating our early warning networks for weeks. They used some kind of stealth technology we've never encountered. What the Empire didn't know was that Corvin phase shift technology, combined with human tactical planning and Valdorian strategic intelligence, had allowed Alliance forces to move invisible through Imperial space. The impregnable defenses of LaterTheir Prime had been carefully mapped and analyzed by reconnaissance teams that the Empire never even suspected existed. The battle began not with a massive assault, but with something the Empire had never experienced: a broadcast message aimed directly at the planet's population. "People of LaterTheir Prime," Admiral Chen's voice echoed across every communication channel on the planet. "We have not come to conquer you. We have come to liberate you from the tyrants who have oppressed this galaxy for centuries. Lay down your weapons and you will be treated with the dignity every sentient being deserves." In the factories and residential districts of the capital, ordinary citizens looked up at the sky with wonder. For the first time in their lives, someone was offering them a choice. The Empire had always demanded obedience. These strangers offered freedom. Riots began almost immediately. Workers who had toiled in munitions factories for generations suddenly refused to produce weapons for their oppressors. Citizens who had lived in fear of the secret police began openly discussing their grievances. Even some Imperial soldiers began to question their orders. "Sir," Admiral Vorthak reported with obvious distress, "we're receiving reports of civil unrest in 17 major cities. The planetary defense grid is operating at reduced efficiency due to sabotage." Emperor Zakthul's response was predictable and brutal. "Activate urban pacification protocols. Show these traitors what happens to those who forget their place." But the Empire's traditional methods of control were failing. Human agents who had been living on LaterTheir Prime for years under deep cover had spent months building networks of resistance among the local population. When the moment came, these networks activated with devastating effect. The space battle itself was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Rather than engaging the defensive platforms directly, human forces used tactics that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Ships phased in and out of normal space, appearing behind enemy lines to strike at critical targets before vanishing again. Dr. Vasquez's quantum weapons proved devastatingly effective against the orbital defenses. Each shot reached across space instantaneously, bypassing shields and armor to destroy targets at the molecular level. Platform after platform simply ceased to exist, their atoms scattered like dust in the solar wind. But the humans and their allies weren't content to simply destroy. When Imperial ships attempted to surrender, they were accepted into protective custody and their crews offered the chance to join the Alliance. When planetary defense forces laid down their weapons, they were integrated into the liberation effort. "This is insane," muttered Imperial Admiral Krextal, who had been given command of the home fleet after his previous defeats. "They're treating this like a rescue operation, not a conquest." He was right. Humanity had learned something from their study of galactic history that the Empire never understood. True victory came not from destroying your enemies, but from convincing them to become your friends. Commander Torres led her fighter squadrons in precision strikes against the Imperial Palace itself, but her targets were carefully selected. Communications arrays to prevent the Emperor from coordinating his forces, power generators to limit defensive capabilities, transportation hubs to prevent the evacuation of war criminals. "Blue Leader to all units," she reported. "The palace shields are down. Beginning final approach." Inside the palace, Emperor Zakthul faced a choice no Imperial ruler had ever confronted: surrender or watch his capital world burn. His advisors had already begun fleeing to hidden bunkers or attempting to negotiate private surrenders with Alliance forces. "Your Majesty," Admiral Vorthak said quietly, "perhaps it's time to consider terms. The humans have shown they're willing to be reasonable with those who cooperate." Zakthul's response was to activate the Omega Protocol. Hidden weapons throughout the galaxy began charging, preparing to sterilize any world that had joined the rebellion. If the Empire couldn't rule the galaxy, no one would. But humanity had been prepared for this moment. The intelligence provided by Commander Vextal had allowed Alliance forces to locate and disable many of the Omega weapons before they could fire. Those that remained were targeted by quantum strikes that destroyed them before they could reach full power. "Omega Protocol is neutralized," reported Admiral Chen's intelligence officer. "The Emperor's doomsday weapons are offline." The final assault on the Imperial Palace was led by ground forces representing every species in the Alliance. But at their head marched a unit of human Marines carrying something symbolic: a banner bearing the image of Marcus Chen, the 12-year-old boy whose death had started this revolution. Emperor Zakthul was found in his throne room, surrounded by the last of his loyal guards. When Alliance forces breached the doors, they expected to find a tyrant raging against his fate. Instead, they found a broken old being who finally understood that his empire had been built on foundations of sand. "I surrender," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of the arrogance that had once terrorized the galaxy. "I surrender unconditionally. The war was over. After 500 years of Imperial rule, the galaxy was free." But humanity and their allies understood that winning the war was only the beginning. Now came the much harder task of building something better. Admiral Chen stood in the Imperial throne room, looking out at the representatives of dozens of species who had fought together for freedom. They had proven something remarkable. that even the most powerful tyranny could fall when good people chose to stand together. "The Empire is ended," he announced. "Today we begin building the Galactic Alliance founded on principles of equality, justice, and mutual respect. No species will dominate others. No world will stand alone against oppression." In a small cemetery on Earth, a new monument was erected bearing the names of all who had died under Imperial rule. At its center stood a statue of a 12-year-old boy looking up at the stars with hope in his eyes. Marcus Chen had died to save his family. In the end, he had saved everyone. 1 year after the fall of the Empire, representatives from 200 worlds gathered on a space station built in the neutral zone between former Imperial and Allied territories. The station, named Harmony after Captain Rodriguez's diplomatic vessel, was designed by architects from a dozen different species working together for the first time in galactic history. Admiral Chen, now calling himself simply David Chen to mark the transition from wartime to peace, stood before the assembled delegates as the first elected president of the Galactic Alliance. Behind him hung a banner that had become the symbol of the new government, stars of different colors arranged in a perfect circle, representing the equality of all member worlds. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast assembly hall, "we gather today not as conquerors and conquered, but as partners in building a better future. The Empire ruled through fear and division. We will govern through hope and cooperation." The changes that had swept the galaxy in just 1 year would have been unimaginable under Imperial rule. Former slave worlds now hosted universities where species that had been forbidden to learn could study alongside their former oppressors. Trade routes that had been restricted to Imperial shipping now carried goods and ideas freely between worlds that had never been allowed to communicate. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been appointed head of the Alliance Science Council, where her work on quantum weapons had been redirected toward peaceful purposes. The same technology that had destroyed Imperial fleets now powered faster-than-light communication systems that allowed instant contact between distant worlds. "We've achieved something remarkable," she explained to a gathering of scientists from across the galaxy. "For the first time in history, every species can share their knowledge freely. The scientific advances we're making together exceed anything any single civilization could accomplish alone." But perhaps the most significant change was happening on worlds that had been at the heart of Imperial power. On LaterTheir Prime, the former Imperial capital, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission worked to address the crimes of the past while building foundations for the future. Commander Vextal, the officer who had executed Marcus Chen, stood before this commission to give testimony about Imperial war crimes. His cooperation with Alliance forces had earned him amnesty, but he chose to speak not for legal protection, but for moral necessity. "I pulled the trigger that killed that boy," he said, his voice breaking with emotion he had never been allowed to express under Imperial rule. "I told myself I was following orders, that I had no choice. But the truth is, I chose to see him as less than a person, because that made it easier to do terrible things." His testimony, broadcast across the galaxy, became a catalyst for similar confessions from thousands of former Imperial officials. The Alliance had proven that justice didn't require vengeance, that accountability could coexist with forgiveness. The economic transformation was equally dramatic. Under Imperial rule, wealth had flowed upward to a few core worlds while outer colonies existed in poverty. The Alliance instituted a system of mutual aid, where prosperous worlds shared resources with those still recovering from Imperial exploitation. The Thraxian mining worlds, freed from forced labor, became centers of innovation as their people rediscovered their natural gifts for engineering and design. The Valdorian strategic academies, no longer hidden in underground bunkers, became prestigious institutions where military officers from across the galaxy learned the arts of peacekeeping and humanitarian intervention. Captain Rodriguez, now Admiral Rodriguez and head of Alliance Security, oversaw the transformation of former Imperial military forces. Rather than disbanding them entirely, the Alliance offered Imperial soldiers the opportunity to retrain as peacekeepers and humanitarian workers. "We need people who understand military operations," she explained to skeptical Alliance politicians. "But we need them to use those skills to protect civilians, not oppress them. Some of our most effective peacekeepers are former Imperial officers who understand better than anyone why the old system failed." The success of this program exceeded all expectations. Former enemies worked side by side to provide disaster relief, protect trade routes from pirates, and mediate disputes between worlds. The military traditions of honor and service that the Empire had corrupted were restored to their proper purpose. But the greatest triumph of the new era was visible in the smallest details of daily life. Children from different species played together in integrated schools. Scientists collaborated on research projects that would benefit all worlds equally. Artists created works that celebrated the diversity of galactic civilization, rather than promoting the supremacy of any single species. On Earth, in the rebuilt city of New Shanghai, Marcus Chen's parents had become symbols of the transformation their son's sacrifice had made possible. They worked with Alliance Social Services to help other families affected by imperial violence, turning their grief into a force for healing. Marcus always wanted to help people, his mother said during a ceremony marking the 2nd anniversary of his death. I think he would be proud to see how many people his sacrifice has helped. The memorial service was attended by beings from across the galaxy, each one representing lives that had been touched by the boy's death and the revolution it inspired. Emperor Zakthul, now living in comfortable exile and working with historians to document the failures of his regime, sent a message of condolence and gratitude. I spent my life believing that power came from making others fear you. His message read, This boy taught the galaxy that true power comes from inspiring others to be better than they thought possible. The Alliance faced challenges that would have seemed impossible to solve under the old system. Climate disasters on former colony worlds required coordinated responses involving dozens of species. Economic inequality created by centuries of imperial exploitation couldn't be corrected overnight. Political tensions between worlds with vastly different cultures and values required constant negotiation and compromise. But for the first time in galactic history, these challenges were being addressed through cooperation rather than coercion. The Alliance had proven that diverse species could work together as equals, that conflicts could be resolved through discussion rather than domination. Admiral Chen stood once again on the observation deck of the space station Harmony, looking out at the stars that now represented hope rather than conquest. In the distance, ships from 100 different worlds moved peacefully through space, carrying trade goods, scientific equipment, and diplomatic delegations between worlds that had once been enemies. The transformation wasn't complete. It would take generations to fully heal the wounds left by imperial rule. There would be setbacks, conflicts, and moments when the ideals of the Alliance would be tested by the realities of governing a diverse galaxy. But humanity had given the galaxy something it had never possessed before, proof that a better future was possible. They had shown that even the most entrenched tyranny could fall when people chose to stand together. They had demonstrated that mercy was stronger than fear, that cooperation was more powerful than conquest. As Admiral Chen watched the ships move peacefully through the void, he thought about a 12-year-old boy who had died trying to help his family. That boy had become the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history, proving that even the smallest act of courage could change the universe. Marcus Chen's legacy lived on in every free world, every integrated classroom, every peaceful negotiation between former enemies. He had shown the galaxy that heroes weren't made by the power they wielded, but by the principles they were willing to die for. The stars no longer belonged to emperors and tyrants. They belonged to everyone, and they shone with the promise of a future where every being could reach for them as equals.